One of the most important events in Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein is the scene in which the titular scientist destroys the body he was preparing to be a bride for his first creation, the monster. The monster, left jaded and misanthropic from the curse of life given to him, only wanted a companion in the same form as himself, someone who could understand and in some way complete him. I do know that for the sympathy of one living being, I would make peace with all. I have love in me the likes of which you can scarcely imagine, and rage the likes of which you would not believe. If I cannot satisfy the one, I will indulge the other. And yet, Victor is so self-consumed with his own torture, the guilt he feels after bringing this life into the world, that he ruins the one chance at happiness the monster could have. He abhors his first act so much that he destroys the bride's body. This is the moment where our protagonist becomes the villain. In a sense, his hubris is the cause of his own downfall. The monster kills Victor's wife, Elizabeth, setting off the final act of the book, where both of them are driven to their inevitable ends. The murder is a turning point, where it becomes clear the monster doesn't just want to kill Victor, he wants to ruin his life, and he's going to take everything he loves. Now imagine you're creating a video game based on this classic, incredible story, one where you play as the monster himself, and it falls on you to depict this scene. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a 1994 video game based on the film, based on the book. There are 3 versions of it, 2 16-bit ports, and 1 Sega CD version. That's right, baby. Technology. Come to think of it, it's kind of funny to compare Genesis with all the doohickeys on it to a cobbled-together monster. This is the one we'll be talking about today for Halloween, as it's the most distinct one. Disclaimer, I haven't actually seen the movie this game is based on, but I have read the book multiple times, and I'm vaguely aware that the movie is some sort of vanity piece for the director/star to be shirtless and wet while birthing Robert De Niro. Much like the monster, the circumstances of this game's release are also pretty unusual. It was only ever available as a pack-in title with the Sega CD version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, another mid-90s horror classic author and title movie game. That got its own standalone release, but this, I guess, wasn't considered marketable enough. I've never seen a whole complete game only being released via staple gun. Forgive me for the weird lines in the FMV sequences, it's some kind of emulation error I can't be bothered to fix. Don't worry, you're not missing much. Just a nearly 5-minute long cutscene depicting the monster's creation in lovely, shiny FMV. It drags for so long, I started thinking it was on a loop, because there's so many shots of mad science equipment and the Frankentub, and they all start blurring together. The first act of the game begins in Ingolstadt at Victor's lab. You play as the monster, who has a beautiful, smooth walking animation that the back of the box claims is rotoscoped. Speaking of Ingolstadt, it also touts the city's cholera-infested streets. Oh boy, gather around, kiddies. You excited to visit Cholera Boulevard? Maybe stop by Syphilis Alley? Now, the book is mostly Victor moping around and being a pensive goth, so I actually like the idea of putting the player in control of the monster. It's a side of the story that's only ever described to us, and he's much more of an active character, even if it's off-screen. Believe it or not, this is an adventure game. Your first task is to escape Victor's apartment, and you do so by finding and using items to progress in simple puzzles. I won't sing its praises too much, as it's very stripped back and simple compared to, honestly, any of its contemporaries in the genre. You'll occasionally speak to someone, but there's no real interactive conversing or any kind of depth to it. It's find item, use item, complete with charming little CG renders of every single one. Yeah, this has that distinctive early CD graphics style, where they were trying to go for higher fidelity backgrounds and tile sets, but it always gets crunched and compressed into these grubby, muddy colors. I won't lie, I have a bit of a soft spot for it, and I think it's a shame that there aren't many modern games attempting to throw back to it, like there have been with pixel and low poly art styles. Hey, while we're at it, bring back Mode 7? That stuff rules. In any event, the game's opening is pretty self-explanatory. There's only 2 doors, one leads to the exit, which you don't have the key for, and the other earns you some chemicals, which can be used to kill the eels, blocking your path to the rest of the area. It's actually kind of solidly designed, with setting up a goal and then encouraging you to explore. How about that? In one of the side rooms, you can find what I guess is an unsuccessful experiment, which charges you, initiating... Yep. Oh boy, the combat. So it's a little misleading to call this just an adventure game, because there is combat, and for these encounters it turns into a fighting game. A straight-up Street Fighter II inspired 2D fighter with the life bars and everything. You have a punch, kick, and block button. There's standing, crouching, and aerial attacks. There's high-low blocking, command normals, and there's even a single quarter circle forward punch special move input, this running tackle. It is bizarrely fleshed out. Even in games that switch between vastly different gameplay styles, fighting games are such a mechanically dense genre that you rarely see anything that just becomes one. It runs the risk of being too overwhelming for the player. Not here though. They went pretty all out, for none of the designers or programmers having worked on a game in a style that was like 2 years old, really. And would you believe me if I told you it's not the worst thing in the world? It is stiff as hell, the collision is wonky, and combos are only accidental, but I've played worse. Most of the fights can be cheesed through by doing the running tackle over and over again, because the CPU will rarely block, and if you get the rhythm right, you can just loop that until they die. Killing the mutant, who is kind of like your older brother, I suppose, will get you a bottle of chloroform, which is pretty useful in the next room. Victor will fight you when you try to grab the key, and he's actually a bit tougher than the mutant. What the fuck was that? You can use the chloroform to put him to sleep and avoid the fight. There's a few moments like this littered throughout the game where you can just avoid certain fights with an item, and I like it. You always get those items from exploring and doing optional objectives, and it helps fill the world out a little more beyond the very short runtime of this game. With the key, you break out into the cholera-infested streets of Ingolstadt and must find a way to escape. There's guards blocking the exit, but you can distract them by releasing some prisoners with a key you get from the jailer, who you put to sleep with a sleeping potion you find in an alchemist's workshop. But before you can free them, you need to fight this dog, except you don't. There's a shopkeeper who throws you out of his store, but if you go to the stables, there's a bag of feed you can use to distract a horse, letting you through to find a bale of dry hay. Then you can go to the shopkeeper's house and use that to start a fire with some candles, distracting him so you can go inside and steal a chicken leg, which you can give the dog to placate it and avoid a fight. Is this game kinda not bad? Like, this whole area is a pretty intricate, concise series of little puzzles that all connect to each other and encourages exploring, and it's all pretty good. I don't think I can say the same about the next act. After occupying the guards, you escape the city and venture into the Augsburg forest, a nightmarish series of similar looking screens where it's really easy to get turned around. If you're not using a guide, you'll be here for a while just trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. That's another thing with this game, clarity. This section is supposed to represent the months that the monster spends in the countryside, slowly learning about the world and people. Honestly, my favorite part of the book. However, all that stuff is fairly aimless. It's pretty much a summary of a very slow, day-by-day process he goes through, and there's no clear objective until much later. That ends up clashing with the structure of this game, which is very objective-based. You are meant to do things in a certain order with some optional side content. So when it attempts to capture that aimlessness, it just ends up being confusing and time-wasting. Thankfully, this is the only time you'll have to deal with this sort of thing, even if it can get frustrating. You only really have to help a few people out, fight a random wolf. Jesus, that is an angry wolf! The back of the box promised this, in addition to other fantastic bosses like outlaws and landlords. What are we, the French? You do, in fact, beat a landlord to death when he threatens to evict a farmer from his land. So I can't say it was lying. By helping out the farmer, the monster learns of the location of Frankenstein Manor, Geneva, and sets out on a 5-month journey to meet his maker. Geneva is where I started to notice how good this game's music is. Granted, it's not the best out there, but if it's going for a more gothic film score style, it's not bad to listen to on loop for a while in-game. Geneva is more of the same. Do some errands until you can figure out a way to get into the Frankenstein Manor itself. I ran into a bug here where after giving this guy some nails to hang up his painting, I just freeze. I can't do anything. I am stuck. This is a good opportunity to talk about this game's save system, because it does have one. That wasn't obvious to me until I looked it up, because pressing start just pauses the game outright. No. To bring up the separate save menu, you need to press B and C together. Whose idea was this? When was this ever a standard? Why wasn't there just a start menu? At least you can save and load at any time, which is rare to see from a console game, especially of this era. That becomes very important because dying sends you back to the beginning of the game. Yeah, there's no checkpoints, no autosaves, you go back. Better save often. The health system is a little funky. You can essentially build up multiple stocks of a health bar up to around 5, but when you go into combat, you start with the amount you've got at that moment, and you can't access the stocks. So a fight can erupt and you've got a third of your health, then you need to die, which takes you back to the screen before, and now you've got a full bar. It's pretty janky. You know what else is janky? This. Oh, what? You don't know what that is? Well, it's obviously a rat trap, a plot-critical item hidden in a mess of pixels. This is actually the only instance of this I can think of in the game. Most items are quite distinct on the backgrounds. I don't know how I would have gotten this without consulting a guide. You can head to the Frankenstein house almost immediately after getting here, but by doing some things for the people around Geneva, you can earn 3 coins to buy some groceries off of a local merchant. With this, the guard of the manor will let you through without trying to fight. Neat. Once inside, you find a secret passage to the attic, where Victor has holed himself up and demand he make you a partner. Victor concedes and sends the monster back out to collect supplies for him. He needs a lot of stuff, and it's a good idea to have a list with you as you head back to Ingolstadt to see such sights as Smallpox Drive. There's a new area with this shopkeeper by the tents, and he really has to go something fierce. The guards' quarters were accessible before, but had nothing in them. Now, if you go to the, what is this place again? What is this sludge? What are you guarding in here? The sewer gate just leads back out to the city. No idea why there's a direct line from it to the police headquarters, but cool. After you get all the stuff and return to Frankenstein Manor, Victor has the goddamn nerve to go back on this entire ordeal and destroy the body of the bride. Mind you, the monster leaves the forest to find him in the first place in April. It's now April again. It's been a whole year to get to this point, and now you do this? Go to hell. And your wife too. I can't describe how absurd it is that this incredibly important scene is adapted into a fighting game combat section. I don't like the idea of this being a fight in the first place. Like, the fact that Elizabeth attacks the monster and can put up a fight kind of takes away from the brutality of the original, where he's just slaughtering really a defenseless bystander. And now she's doing Blanca balls that chunk out your life. Like, it's really dumb. Ooh-wah! For some reason, the monster is petting her body when Victor appears and pushes him off, and then, wordlessly, places her on the operating table, removes his shirt, is that necessary? And resurrects his wife. But now she's the creature's wife. With that, the two of them set off for the Arctic Circle to spend the rest of their days together. Out of curiosity, I checked out a synopsis of the film because this definitely doesn't happen in the book, and yeah, the bride doesn't survive in that one either, so this is all game original. Once on the ship, you're just chilling out, quite literally, when you hear a voice from outside, beckoning her to the ice. On the ship's deck, you confront Victor one last time, and he's the hardest opponent yet, because he actually blocks. Still, he's no match for the tackle. Oh yeah, at OTGs too? That's sick. With that, you light the ship ablaze and live happily ever after. Hey, all's well that ends well. Yeah, the ending to this game's a little weird and abrupt. It's very short overall. It took me less than 2 hours. You know, you tell somebody that you're playing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein for Sega CD, and they ask you, oh, how's that? And I say, not as bad as you'd think. This was still a time where developers artificially inflated their game's playtime by just making them unreasonably difficult, so it's nice to play a game that doesn't really do that. Ironically, that approach has made those games much harder to stomach when you go back to them, whereas this was breezy, all things considered. Recently, I replayed ActRaiser, an early title in the Super Nintendo library, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the whole thing is pretty fair and well designed. The kind of game where you think, man, I could really use a health pickup right now. And there just so happens to be one. The big difference between a game like that and this one is that ActRaiser feels tested. This game was developed by Psygnosis. Now, they don't have a spotless track record, but they're nothing to scoff at, and you can tell that talented people worked on it. It's just very unpolished. There's little imperfections like that mazy forest, that nearly invisible rat trap, and the janky combat, but none of it ever kills the experience. Plus, I actually like a lot of the adventure game stuff. I would bet you that if you talked to one of the developers today, they would tell you that this thing was rushed out the door in a mad scramble to hit the movie's release window. Hell, maybe it was commissioned late in the process compared to the 16-bit games, and that's why it only came packaged with the Dracula game. If you want a quick wrap on the talent who made this game, the team lead, Nikki Karras Westcott, later went on to be a head artist on Wipeout 3. Programmer Jed Adams most recently landed a role as technical director for The Quarry, and another programmer, Simon Moore, was a senior UI designer on Baldur's Gate 3. That's just a couple. A lot of the people who worked on this are still in the industry working on big budget titles, and it makes sense. At the end of the day, I went into this game ready for it to be weird garbage, and I came out pleasantly surprised. I guess when a lot of talented people come together, even if you hand them slop and rush the hell out of them, they can still put something decent together. I have a Patreon and a podcast. Happy Halloween, everyone. Have a scary, hairy time, you You furries. I don't know why I said furries.
Here comes a daredevil. Game over.